50 minutes to finish this session so that you all can have lunch in time. Yeah, so I do need your cooperation and support to make sure that we manage to eat after this session. So this panel is about operationalization of institutional framework. We have 4 speakers, 3 present here. One, we will try to connect him again through Skype, Harjeet. He's not with us now. So, and in terms of sequencing, we have changed it a little bit. Let's start with Siddharth's presentation, which is more about Lima overall expectations, and then we get into nitty-gritty. So it's going to be Siddharth first, followed by Lavanya, Manish, and then Harjeet. It could be Harjeet or then Manish. So I hope that's okay. So I'll invite Siddharth to take the floor.
Thank you. Could you put the presentation? Alright, so just to give you an introduction, I'm Siddharth and I work for Climate Action Network, and we have just sort of finalized our annual sort of policy document, which basically is a collaborative work across the network to figure out what should be the policy demands and asks towards Lima itself. We are a broad, I don't know how many of you are aware about CAN, but we are like a broad network of 900 plus membership across like 36 to 37 countries, and we are sort of we are structured in a sort of hub and spoke manner where there is a broader CAN and then there are various regional nodes with feedback into the larger network itself. Okay, so just before, like as the presentation is coming on, just wanted to sort of flag the fact that in the previous session there was a lot of real politic discussion and talking about how the situation looks very bleak and how emissions are not being cut. But I think that there's an important sort of lesson to be learned, that I think that in our sort of work as civil society, there's a really important need to engage not just with the UNFCCC, but not just with the negotiations, but also the larger sort of institutional framework of sorts of climate change, whether it's the GCF, whether it's G20, because a lot of these decisions are being taken across the board and not necessarily only in the UNFCCC. And I personally am not as sort of critical or as depressed about the situation, whether it's emission reduction or anything else, because I feel that there's still a lot of opportunity for influencing the process itself, and but the window of opportunity itself is extremely small. And from past experience, I have consistently seen that civil society is engaging a lot more constructively within the negotiations, rather than just sticking to certain broader principles that we sort of stick to, and we are sort of giving more and more solutions to various political problems and within the realm of the political system itself.
Not working. Is it?
It's not the, it's the projector problem.
Oh, okay. Okay. You have PPT or
Maybe money should start.
yeah. Is it? Just a minute. Okay. Department again. Manish, why don't you tell us a little bit about Namas?
Well, I think in some sense this question of Namas is related to INDCs. There is a lot of speculation about the relationship between INDCs and NAMAs. When NAMAs were introduced in Bali, the same questions were asked as they are being asked now about what could be INDCs, what form they could take. But the nationally appropriate mitigation actions, as they were introduced in Bali, they looked like the actions that developing countries would take, keeping in mind that sustainable development understanding and the type of support on technology, finance and capacity building they would receive. So they were really like, at the beginning, more in the tune of whatever developing countries can take, want to take, and how they implement those actions. Eventually, it changed from a label to a mechanism, and that too more because a lot began to happen outside UNFCCC. So you have UNDP's low emission capacity building program, which is supporting or trying to design and implement NAMAs in more than 25 countries. Then we have UK and Germany announcing NAMA facility to support NAMAs. The argument that these guys put forth were really that, okay, we just want to explore how NAMAs could be implemented. What could be the modalities? And it emerges that there are two broad issues when we think about implementing NAMAs. One is the technical aspect, which basically looks at the issues of baseline and MRV structures. And second question relates to the type of support and how support mechanisms could function. On baseline and MRV, there is work stream 1 under the ADP program, so SBI is looking at the possibilities. Now, because there is a lot of uncertainty on the type of NAMAs, whether it could be just a CDM type of project or a nationwide policy or economy-wide target or a large program in the form of something like the missions that different countries have. There are diversity of type of actions that one can think of as NAMAs, and with each type of actions there is a different type of issues regarding how to set the baseline to measure the mitigation benefits or the larger benefits in the form of sustainable development benefits that could be associated or visualized with NAMAs. Second part is MRV. Now, because you have the problem with setting up baselines, you also have the issues of MRV. And if you look at the recent the last workshop of SBI which discussed these issues, there were probably 3 types of problems that were raised. One is, of course, that the setting of baselines, and the suggestion was that maybe because the scope and nature of NAMAs is too diverse, so one has to really deal with each NAMA or setting baselines for each NAMA on a case-by-case basis. Similarly, for MRV also, one has to also look at it as a case-by-case basis. One idea of one objective of the workshops of SBI is to come up with guidelines to set up methodologies for baseline determination in MRV. Now, as of now, there are no serious or clear guidelines on that. The second part deals with much more complicated question, which is the source of support. Now, one point that is raised that there are so many initiatives to support NAMAs, and each of them require different type of reporting structure. So with a different support initiative comes a different requirement of MRV. That really puts a lot of transaction cost burden on those who are interested in developing NAMAs and implementing them. And third part, of course, is how to really include private sector in it, because so far it goes with almost without saying that all NAMAs have to have a government buy-in and government participation. So this is what's happening within the negotiation front, but if we look at the other operational mechanisms, we have one in the NAMA registry. NAMA registry was set up as following a decision at Durban. The purpose of NAMA registry was basically to that countries, developing countries would submit their ideas and seek support for preparation and implementation, or may report just actions for recognition, and whoever can support in developing countries and the private sector or multilateral development banks or whoever with money wants to support can use that database and information and come forward with support. So it was really envisaged as a matchmaking platform. As of now, we have 22 NAMAs seeking support for preparation, 37 NAMA ideas seeking support for implementation, 4 seeking recognition. There are 14 initiatives for supporting NAMAs, and only 7 are listed as actual support. Now, so there is a lot of activity one can see, because the NAMA registry became operational in 2013 only. So within a 1 year, there's a lot of activity, lot of enthusiasm on the part of developing countries. But as you can see, that there is a considerable and serious mismatch between the demand for support and the provision for support. I was hoping that Srini would speak on GCF and how it could, the funding would continue with that.
Manish, I think to that extent, Indrajit covered GCF substantially, so
right.
That's done.
So that is another channel of support for NAMAs that is opening up, and hopefully that with the recent announcements of money to GCF, one would see some action there. But that puts up a different problem. Now we see there are too many support mechanisms available. That is ambiguity about the baselines and MRV structure. But at the same time, there are NAMAs being implemented, so there is a lot of lessons and learnings emerging. So what we really have is a huge transaction cost problem with implementing nationally appropriate mitigation actions. And that is something that is not really on the agenda in the discussions of SBI, that how these different mechanisms, many within the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention. For example, CTCN is thinking of starting a NAMA support window on technology. So that could be integrated into it. There are already processes of low emission development strategies on. So whether and how these could inform each other, these could be linked to each other, and a comprehensive scheme for implementing NAMAs be developed with minimum of transaction cost, I think is the real implementation problem, and that's a challenge for the institutional framework that needs to be developed, and unfortunately, in my view, that is really not on the agenda, and that needs to be thought about. And maybe we can discuss more when it comes to if we have time for question and answer.
Thank you, Manish. Just one thing. I'm not sure if you covered it, but INDC NAMAs, for clarity of rest people who do not follow it regularly, what are the linkages, how separate they are, if you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Okay, right now, because the nature of INDCs is pretty speculative, it could, and if you look at the recent draft by the co-chair on INDCs, it includes the mitigation actions, adaptation plans, finance and capacity building support, and almost all pillars of the Bali action plans. So one can expect that all the INDC, the mitigation component of the INDC and the support component of the INDCs could link very well with how the NAMAs are implemented, conceived, designed and implemented. For example, let's assume India goes ahead with this 100 gigawatt renewable solar target by 2022. it would need a lot of money to implement or achieve that target. Whether NAMAs could be a vehicle to implement that is a big question, but it's certainly an open option for India to go forward. And whether the way China or the EU have included their renewable energy targets, and the indications are that they would be part of their INDCs, so that could very well be a part of INDCs. So NAMAs could be, the components that would together form, an INDC, or it could, but there is also a similarity that INDCs could also be economy-wide target, and NAMAs could also be an economy-wide target. So in some cases they could be just same, or in some cases they could be INDCs being bundled up NAMAs, at least the mitigation component of INDC.
Thanks, Manish. I think we can hold on the questions and let's move on to the next presentation. So that when questions are asked, they're asked in context of all inputs received. Naman?
Thank you, Sanjay. What I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is to quickly take you through. So what I'm going to do in the next 10 minutes is to quickly take you through some of the issues relating to legal form and character in the 2015 negotiations. Next slide, please. So to give you a quick overview of the next 10 minutes, I'm going to look at what the likely elements of the 2015 package are. It's likely to consist of a legally binding core agreement, CoP decisions, supplementary instruments, and political declaration or declarations. And I will go into a little bit of detail on what these might look like and what form they might take. I will then talk again very briefly on the legal character of obligations in the core 2015 agreement. And here I'm making a distinction between the obligations more generally. So you have numerous obligations relating to transparency and MRV and all of that, whereas you have more specific obligations which relate to contributions, so legal character of contributions as well. And in that context, I'm going to talk about how you might anchor contributions. There are numerous suggestions by parties that contributions should not be part of the 2015 agreement itself. I will also talk briefly about how legal character links to differentiation and to timing. And then conclude by highlighting some of the key unresolved issues that emerged in the negotiations. So to take you through the elements of the 2015 package, next slide. So the Dublin and Warsaw decisions actually left the legal form of the 2015 agreement unresolved. But there is an emerging operational presumption in the negotiations that the core 2015 agreement will actually be a legally binding instrument. And but this legally binding instrument will not be sort of alone. I mean, there will be other things that will be part of this package. You will likely have COP decisions that will accompany it. You will likely have supplementary instruments such as national schedules, or registries, or information documents. And New Zealand and others are also touting a political declaration, which might be part of this package, political declaration possibly on finance. So what are the options for legally binding instruments? And we know from the Durban platform decision that the legally binding instrument could be a protocol or another legal instrument, or an agreed outcome with legal force. And if we're talking about legally binding instruments, unambiguously legally binding instruments, we're talking about a protocol. Could be an implementing agreement, as the Americans have suggested in the run-up to Copenhagen. It could be amendments to the FCCC. Those would also be legally binding. So you could amend the annexes, for instance, or amend the procedure for amending the annexes. You could have a combination of these. So you could have a protocol and in addition have amendments to the FCCC as well. This is, of course, in the realm of the theoretical, because not too many countries have actually suggested amending the FCCC annexes. A protocol or implementing agreement could also contain annexes, attachments, appendices, and numerous countries have suggested that. That are an integral part of the agreement, in which case whatever is in these appendices, attachments, or annexes will also be legally binding. The importance of legally binding instruments, and I'm only going to spend 30 seconds on this, is because they do reflect the highest expression of political will, and they're only applicable to those that express their consent to be bound by them. And they do render state conduct mandatory and judicially enforceable. So in theory, legally binding instruments are tremendously rigorous. However, and that's why the Alliance of Small Island States and others have been sort of asking for a legally binding instrument, because that would be reflective of the existential crisis that they're in. However, there are limits to legally binding instruments. So you could have a legally binding instrument that has very vague, ambiguous obligations in it. So content of the obligations matters. The rigor of these obligations will really depend upon the normative content of the obligations. Precision matters. So the more precise the standards you have in this legally binding instrument, the more effectively it will function as a standard, as a benchmarking device. Location matters in that if you have legally binding obligations, they are unlikely to be in preambular references. Preambular references only add color and texture to an agreement. If they have to be legally binding, they have to be in the operational part of the agreement. And language matters. So how, even if it is in the operational part of the agreement, you could have contextual and discretionary language sort of in relation to these obligations, which would then create a great deal of flexibility and autonomy. So for instance, you could have language like as appropriate insofar as practicable. Parties shall aim to do something rather than shall do something. So all of that actually has a huge impact on the content and legal character of those obligations and their ability to be enforced. So for instance, the UNFCCC is a legally binding instrument. It's the highest expression of political will. But the content of the obligations within the UNFCCC are fairly ambiguous, and they're couched in contextual and discretionary language. So even, for instance, the target in 4.2, they're formulated as obligations of effort rather than as result, because they use language such as shall aim to reach such and such stabilization target rather than just shall reach or achieve such and such target. So all of this matters in terms of what the legal character of the obligations within a legally binding instrument will be. Now, why is this relevant and why am I stressing this? Because India has long argued that we don't need a legally binding instrument and COP decisions are sufficient. And some of the concern that India has had is that if it's a legally binding instrument, it's automatically rigorous, it's automatically something that will bind us, will constrain our autonomy. We need to negotiate in a more intelligent fashion, because actually we could have a legally binding instrument which has obligations that are couched in contextual and discretionary language, which we can actually negotiate, which will then make it harder for countries to actually label India as sort of the bad boy of negotiations, because we don't want a legally binding instrument. So India has also been arguing that COP decisions are legally binding. So I'm going to spend again 30 seconds on this to say that COP decisions are not, unless there's explicit authorization for them to be legally binding in the parent instrument, they're not actually legally binding. And it's also important to keep in mind that they're not capable of creating substantive new obligations, which will then determine what you're going to actually put in COP decisions and what will be in the legally binding instrument. And it's clear that this package that we have in 2015 will contain COP decisions. And these could be COP decisions that complement the 2015 agreement. They could elaborate and operationalize the 2015 agreement. So for instance, you could have provision for MRV, which is sort of enabling provision for MRV in the agreement, but have extensive COP decisions that actually lay out the methodologies and means and methods of doing things. And these COP decisions could be negotiated in Paris itself or could be left for negotiation after Paris, which creates a little bit of room in terms of actually not rushing to finalize everything by 2015. Supplementary instruments, some parties, primarily the umbrella group, have actually suggested that contributions, so the commitments, actions, contributions, whatever you might label them, should actually be housed separately from this 2015 core legally binding agreement. So they could be in national schedules, they could be in registries and lists, they could be in country contribution documents, as ILAC has suggested, they could be in information documents, they could be in miscellaneous documents. The information documents is what the Cancun pledges are in, and clearly a lot of these these options have been put forward by parties. They have different sort of legal gravitas and status. So for instance, the information document is the kind of document that's used when the Secretariat puts together a list of participants for a COP. So, you know, that's the sort of level of status you'd have, and that's the level of status in a sense that Cancun pledges have. Political declarations is also something which will possibly be part of the package. New Zealand has suggested, for instance, that there could be a political declaration, I mean in the corridors, that there could be a political declaration on finance. So even if you can't have, finance be one of the contributions, which clearly the umbrella countries don't want finance to be an INDC, they're suggesting that in lieu of having it as an INDC, we could have a political declaration on finance saying we're going to put forward X amount of money. That would sort of address their concerns with their budget cycles and all of that. Now, political declaration is similar to the Copenhagen Accord. They don't obviously have legally binding status. So what are the legal character of obligations in the 2015 agreement? Again, sort of develop on the theme that much depends on how these obligations are actually crafted. You could have a range of obligations. They could be procedural obligations, so just relating to, for instance, ex-ante assessment or ex-post review. You could have substantive obligations, so goals, targets, timetables. You could have obligations of effort, so you could just require parties to initiate policies and measures, or you could have obligations of results, so you could actually require parties to achieve the targets and timetables that they have put forward. You could have hard obligations and soft obligations, which would depend, as I said before, on the content of these obligations, the precision of the language, where they're located, language that's used to couch them in. You could also have voluntary and mandatory obligations. So for instance, there could be, and there have been suggestions by New Zealand, that you have parameters for contributions and you should be able to opt in and opt out of certain parameters for contributions based on sort of national circumstances. So it's possible to do a whole host of different things, and I think the lawyers generally are able to craft any mix of hard, soft obligations, voluntary, mandatory, conditional, unconditional obligations to accommodate a whole range of political concerns that countries might have with respect to this particular sort of obligations. Now, the legal character of contributions is perhaps the sort of most interesting part of this discussion, because clearly, in the wider public image, when we're talking about a legally binding instrument, one assumes, in 2015, one assumes that the numbers, as it were, will be legally binding. Isn't that the point? However, it's become very clear in the negotiations, several submissions from parties, and on this there's going to be a sort of overlapping overlapping interests between the major emitters. They don't actually want the contributions in the 2015 agreement. So there have been suggestions for where else you might house these. They could be in a CoP decision, and I said CoP decisions are not legally binding. They could be in national schedules, registries, information documents, and some have even suggested that it just be on the UNFCCC website. And the arguments they use to say it should be housed elsewhere is primarily that it will be easier to amend them. The presumption is that it will be amended upwards, but there's no guarantee of that. That they could be updated on a regular basis. And if we have it as part of the agreement, then it will be much harder to revise them, update them. You need to go back to your parliaments to amend them, etc. So the key point here, though, is wherever they're located. They could be located on the UNFCCC website. They could be located within the 2015 agreement, an integral part of the agreement. The important thing is how these contributions are anchored in the agreement. So you have a provision in the agreement that essentially tells you what the relationship of the contributions will be to this legally binding instrument. And that anchoring provision could make it possible for these contributions, even if they're not part of the agreement, to be legally binding. So you could have a range of different things this anchoring provision could do. First, and this is the case, for instance, in the WTO, you could designate schedules in WTO context, but here contributions, as an integral part of the agreement. And in addition, you could say, well, we're going to commit parties to submitting contributions, and the contributions will be listed on the website. So it's a commitment to submit. You could commit parties to maintaining their schedule, if they're putting their numbers in a schedule, so commitment to maintain. You could commit them to updating their numbers on a regular basis. You could commit them to not backslide, commit to scale up. You could commit them to implement it. And even more rigorous, you could commit them to achieving it. So even if you have numbers on the UNFCCC website, all the contributions, you could still have a provision in the agreement saying we are binding parties, or the agreement binds parties to actually achieving these numbers which are on the UNFCCC website. You could also commit them to legislate these numbers domestically, and this is the case in, for instance, the Antarctic Treaty System and other regimes. So you could have a whole different set of combination of these different sorts of commitments which are in the anchoring provision. And that will determine the legal character of these contributions. There are questions that arise in this context on differentiation and symmetry. China and others have argued that, and India, the like-minded group, have argued the legal character of contributions should be symmetrical across different types of contributions. So the scope of contributions is yet to be determined, and Sudhir spoke about it in the earlier session. But if we decide that we're going to have contributions across all the sort of elements of the Durban platform, so on mitigation, adaptation, finance, etc., then the legal character of contributions should be symmetrical is what some argue, but others argue not, that mitigation should be legally binding but not finance. It could be, legal character of contributions could be differentiated across developing countries. This is a theoretical possibility. You could also have different schedules as we did, or different lists for developing and developed countries. These are all possibilities. You could also have different anchoring provisions. So for instance, you could have an anchoring provision for a list of developing country contributions saying that this, we commit parties to submitting their contributions, we commit parties to aiming to achieve them, but you could have an anchoring provision, different anchoring provision for developed country contributions which commits them to achieving them, committing them to legislating on them. Now, interestingly, because the like-minded group has been so insistent that there should be strict differentiation between developed and developing, and we should stick to the FCCC annexes, they haven't been engaging in this kind of discussion on the legal character of issues and how you could differentiate in this new sort of landscape, as it were. And this would be the logical extension of what they've been arguing, but they haven't actually been arguing this. And finally, on timing, another, I think, assumption that the wider civil society makes is that 2015 is a do or die deadline, that we will have contributions inscribed in Paris, and after all, we've spent 4 years negotiating this. So we should be in a position to inscribe numbers in Paris. But it's not clear that the numbers that will be inscribed in Paris will be final numbers. South Africa, for instance, has been arguing that we need to have numbers that are processed internationally. So if we don't have a rigorous assessment process, and we're not in a position to put that into place before 2015, because then it'll have to be done in Lima, it means that all the numbers or contributions countries are going to make next year will be unprocessed, will be exclusively nationally determined. There will be no international assessment process that applies to them. And do we really want to finalize these? Do we want to formalize and finalize these? Shouldn't we actually have time to look at these numbers more carefully, see if they're adequate, equitable, etc.? So for instance, we might have numbers that are provisional in 2015 and become final later. And that's another argument that the umbrella group has been using to say that, well, we shouldn't have numbers in the 2015 agreement because then we'd have to agree all of it in 2015. Whereas if we have numbers that are outside, they could be provisional in 2015, could become final in 2017. So if that is going to be the case, then when should these numbers actually be agreed? What form should they take? And what relationship should they have to the 2015 agreement? Because if you agree them in the context of everything else in 2015, then you could actually have them be part of the annex, be an integral part of the agreement, and be legally binding. But if you're not actually going to agree on numbers by 2015, and you're going to have numbers 2 years after, what's that going to say about the legal character of these numbers? So just finally, quickly run through the sort of key issues that are unresolved and which need to be resolved going forward on legal form and character. What legal form should the 2015 agreement take? What should it include, exclude, in particular whether it should include contributions? What should be covered in CoP decisions, keeping in mind that CoP decisions can't create substantive new obligations and are not legally binding? What should be captured in supplementary instruments? Should they just be contributions, or should we not have contributions in supplementary instruments? Whether a political declaration is necessary, might be useful. If yes, what should it focus on? Should it just be finance? I should say in the context of political declarations that it might even be possible to have, if all else fails in Paris, we could still have a political declaration between a subset of parties, as we did in Copenhagen. So, that is a sort of, it's a backup plan, as it were. What legal character should contributions assume? How should the anchoring provision be framed? and should anchoring legal character, all of this be uniform across developing, or should be differentiated? So these are the sort of key unresolved questions that will need to be sort of resolved in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lavanya. That's very helpful. I normally consider legal experts as chief chef who will be given ingredients before Paris to cook something very tasty, and people will go with satisfaction. But I know you have a difficult task.
As long as it's edible.
As long as it's edible. And you need to make it edible. So that's another challenge. Okay, Siddharth.
Alright, so like Lavanya also sort of said that there are lots of questions on the legal form of the agreement, but there are still obviously discussions about the content of the agreement itself. And just to sort of start off by saying that Paris is not Copenhagen, and like Lavanya also said that it's not going to be the end of the negotiations. It's going to provide a framework for us which is probably going to last us for another decade or so in terms of how the international processes actually support the agreement. If you can go to the next slide, please. So COP20 in Lima is going to take 3 key decisions, whether it can be in separated text, but there are 3 key decisions that are likely to be taken. One is a decision on Work Stream 2, which is basically the pre-2020 action and ambition that has been talked about in the Gigaton Gap, whether it's all the sort of Cancun pledges, what do they amount to, and what basically should pre-2020 ambition look like, including finance and means of implementation. The second sort of text is the intended nationally determined contribution text, which basically will, initially it was thought to be just upfront information requirement, which to break it down further is like if the US or well China has put a target of 2030 peaking, what exactly is the methodology behind that peaking? What is the sort of base year? What is the sort of tonnage that they are going to reduce? What are the sort of policies that they're going to take? So basically all the clarification of all these numbers now surfacing from the EU, US and China, all the clarity behind those numbers which actually give the real meat to those numbers is likely to be figured out, that what should be the upfront information requirements that come alongside these numbers that country commit to. Along with this also, within this particular decision, there's also a very live discussion to a certain extent on what should be the components of the INDCs, whether it should be purely mitigation or whether it should have elements of adaptation, finance and other means of implementation to be brought in. The third one is the grand text on the elements of the 2015 agreement. This is broadly going to give a framework of what the 2015 agreement is going to look like. It's going to be sort of the basis of the draft negotiating text that needs to supposedly come by May 2015 officially, and so that these 3 decisions sort of will probably form the package in terms of Lima. Next slide. In Workstream 2, clearly, like a lot of people said, that there's a gap, and we're sort of obviously starting to talk about commitments in 2030 and what the targets would be. But this gap needs to be clearly fulfilled, and whatever happens in the pre-2020 period is really going to create a foundation for post-2020. All countries, for CAN, it's important that all countries need to revise their pre-2020 targets, especially the developed countries. It is, like I said before, also it's a very big question on political will, and how much is there a possibility for developed countries to actually improve their pre-2020 targets. There is a key meeting on the 20th of November, this I think next 2 days, which is on GCF capitalization, where basically the means of implementation, the finance for this pre-2020 increase in ambition is going to be figured out. CAN is calling for at least 15 billion USD public finance, and that is really going to either open the political knots in pre-2020 or is really going to make the process very difficult in Lima. In terms of the larger operational elements of Workstream 2, there have what we are trying to call for is a roadmap. So as of now, there's been consistent discussion in Workstream 2, and they're really discussions. They've had like discussions on renewable energy, CCS, transport, cities. So they've had these technical expert meetings, and these meetings are primarily some countries giving a presentation, private sector coming in and saying that this should be done, some very little sort of involvement from civil society on what actions could be taken in these areas. But I think from workstream 2, we need some sort of a concrete plan to actually close the gap, not just talk about the possible solutions and how these solutions need to be operationalized. So there needs to be a very clear roadmap from 2015 to 2017, which looks at practical implementation of the solutions being talked about in the technical expert meetings, which are called TEMS. We are also asking for enhancing the mandate for the technical expert meeting itself, so it should not just be a discussion forum where people come and talk about options, but actually look at how really to work towards getting that solution going. So like Soumya's presentation initially sort of laid out that this is the potential in various sectors for mitigation ambition, going a step further than that and saying that, okay, these are the sort of policies and actions that can possibly be taken at an international level in these sectors, and how do we really operationalize it by anchoring it in the UNFCCC, or how do you sort of recognize it to a certain extent. The other part of workstream 2 is clearly means of implementation, which primarily would obviously mean finance. Right now there is no roadmap. All these commitments to the GCF are just initial capitalization. Some of these commitments are for 3 years, some of these commitments are just for initial capitalization. So there needs to be some sort of consistency and target orientation towards finance in the pre-2020 period. For that, we're calling for very clear future annual targets for contributions in relation to finance, which will depend on different countries and their budgetary sort of circumstances, but we need to have some clarity on what is the sort of finance that's likely going to be mobilized in the GCF from now to 2020. There should be a commitment to continuously increase this annual contribution, and I think there is going to be a financial ministerial at Lima also. So hopefully these sort of political questions need to be answered at that ministerial itself. And one of the key things, like Manish also pointed out, that a lot of NAMAs are in the pipeline. There are a lot of adaptation projects which are also in the pipeline in the adaptation fund, and they are pretty much ready to be funded but has no money. So there is a need to actually put immediately $80 million into the adaptation fund so that those projects can actually start getting implemented. The third aspect of pre-2020 was what Raghu was pointing to in the beginning, that how do you really bring the science into the UNFCCC process, and there is a specific sort of joint contact group on review, and that review group needs to actually take in findings from the AR5, the adequacy findings, the science findings, and actually direct it. They can't really push the ADP or the CoP to actually take on decisions, but they definitely can recommend to these two sort of bodies that there is an inadequacy in terms of the commitments. There is a need to sort of increase the ambition in the shorter and the longer term. So there needs to be some sort of improvement on the target. So there needs to be some renewed political impetus. The main mandate of this joint contact group is basically to figure out whether the 2-degree target continues to be adequate. So there was a consistent discussion between 2 degrees and 1.5. So one is that, and two is that the current existing commitments that are being put on the table, are they adequate to meet this long-term target of 2 degree or 1.5? These are the two main mandates for this joint contact group, which clearly sort of is extremely important from an ethical point of view to check adequacy. Next slide, please. In terms of work stream 1, I've sort of divided it into two parts, I think. So the first one is obviously on INDCs, which has been the sort of bone of contention for a lot of people. What we're calling out for is a process to review and assess adequacy. We know targets are going to be falling short. We know that the US, China, or whoever sort of comes on the table right now is not going to give enough in terms of numbers. And also, Lavanya, like Lavanya said, it's not like they're the final numbers. We hope they're not. So that we can actually have a review and an assessment of these numbers from an adequacy and equity perspective, so that they can be improved later on. So that's what we are calling for. We are calling for a review and adequacy sort of assessment before Paris, hopefully, before the numbers the INDCs are actually anchored in. I don't know when, but maybe, if they are anchored in Paris, then definitely we want the review before Paris. We would like to see finance within the scope of the INDC. So a lot of countries have been calling for finance to not be within this scope, but we would definitely like to see finance within that scope. It might not necessarily be numbers, but it clearly is a very important obligation for the developed countries, and also for those developing countries who are in a position to do so, to actually put across finance on the table, because it's an obligation for them. The third point is a greater role for civil society. In the UNFCCC, civil society has been treated as outsiders. If you look at other conventions, the role of civil society has been a lot more engaging within the process itself. I think this is, considering it's the new framework that we're talking about, there's a really big need for us to push for a stronger and recognized role of civil society within the UNFCCC, as well as in the formulation of the INDC. The very fact that we're completely unaware of what's going on in India and we have to depend on journalists to actually get information is not right. So there is something that we're trying to do in relation to having some obligation or some sort of commitment in relation from governments that civil society will be engaged in the national discussions on INDC itself. The fourth point was on equity indicators. This comes from the first point itself, that in the upfront information requirements, we are going to give a base year, we are going to give various other sort of details in relation to your target. You should also give an indicator which talks about how adequate that target is in relation to others and how fair that target is in relation to others. So some sort of a equity and a fairness indicator that should also be part of the upfront information requirements that are sort of supplementary with the number itself. For timelines, we believe that they should actually come by March 2015 for most of the most of the countries, which is basically the MEF countries, and the rest of the world it can come by June. But we need to have the numbers coming in early so that we can actually do an assessment of those numbers, so that those numbers can be questioned and hopefully those numbers can be improved. Next slide. In terms of the elements of the draft agreement itself, one of the key things that we've sort of come out with a position also, and one of the things that we're calling out for is phasing out of all fossil fuel emissions, as well as a phasing in of 100% renewable energy with energy access for all, as early as possible, but no later than 2050. This is in line with CAN's position on 1.5 degrees Celsius, and this obviously does not give a broader picture, but if you look at the entire position paper that CAN has developed, it actually sort of alludes to the fact that how this can be achieved, how transfers between developing countries and developed countries need to happen in order to support this long-term vision. So we would like to see this sort of a vision being reflected in the new agreement. There are already discussions which are ongoing on some sort of a terminology of zero carbon or carbon neutrality, which are a lot more dangerous. Because carbon neutrality can mean CCS, can mean nuclear, can mean a lot of other technologies that a lot of people in this room are very uncomfortable with. So we need to sort of put across another sort of formulation for this long-term vision which is being put forward. We would like to see global goals on public finance. Private finance will mobilize itself automatically, and there are enough supporters of private finance to help it sort of go through, but public finance is completely neglected, and we would like to see that there are global goals for public finance in the post-2020 regime, along with very strong MRV for finance, so that we actually know what the finance is coming for and what the finance is actually meant to do, rather than have this ambiguity over whether this finance is for something else or some sort of repackaging of finance itself. So that's what we are sort of trying to call for. Next slide, please. On adaptation, again, there is already a discussion on global adaptation goal, and we would like to see global adaptation goal not just reflecting national adaptation planning and action, but also reflecting the fact that how mitigation and lack of mitigation actually adds a massive burden on countries to adapt. So there should be a very strong linkage between mitigation and adaptation and how they have a feedback loop between each other in terms of how they impact. We are calling for a capacity building coordinating body as well. We would like this body to be actually a place where capacities for countries in relation to MRB, in relation to inventory, in relation to financial reporting, all these sort of real capacity building needs are addressed, not just in a decentralized manner across different sort of spectrums, but actually in some sort of a centralized body in itself. Again, like I said before, enhanced role for civil society within various institutions. A 2-year work program for loss and damage, because as of now, loss and damage, we're still not sure whether the mechanism is going to be ready to be anchored into the agreement and whether they can be placeholders or not. But at least there should be some sort of a very clear loss and damage program which gives us that clarity as to whether it can be anchored within the 2015 agreement or whether it will be outside. And finally, on a ratchet up mechanism in terms of any future contribution and pledges that come in, we need to go through this process of international evaluation based on equity, based on adequacy, scientific adequacy, so that we don't fall short on the real ambition that's required. Next slide, please. So this is just like a very quick snapshot of what is in the annual policy document. If you want to sort of get, like, that has a lot more details, and if you want to read that, it's on the CAN website, so you can download it from there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Siddharth. So, because of time constraint, the fact that Harjeet needed to go to another session again on Skype, so we are dropping him. But any questions on loss and damage, I'm sure Siddharth can also give an update. He has been working on this Lima document for the last few months. So, the floor is open for questions, additions, clarifications. For next, I would say, actually, it's only 5 minutes. So, we'll take only one round of questions and queries. Anu. Ajita.
Yeah, my question is that they are taking reference from one of the previous presentations that does demand to finance for adaptation, for other demands that are there, does that hamper the budget and the domestic budgets of for mitigation of these developed countries? Because as Raghu, I think, was mentioning that if you don't have enough mitigation happening to meet 1.5 or 2, then everything else doesn't matter. So is that a concern somewhere, and, or is it not actually? It's a no-brainer.
Ajita?
Yeah. My question is to Manish. Thanks, Manish. I'm wondering, from the understanding that we have, is that NAMAS is really not flying for India for essentially MRV reasons. And looking at the NAMA framework, which focuses on sustainable development, I'm wondering why isn't India, which has a larger overarching sustainable development priority, take NAMA seriously? Your thoughts on that?
Okay, Nafisa?
Two questions, one to Lavanya and one to Siddharth. To Lavanya, my concern is the whole question of non-compliance. And, so far the experience that we have had is that every time a country, cannot meet its, measures, what it does is it opts out. My question to you is there any legal framework possible for, ensuring non-compliance? That's the question. And to Siddharth, you have mentioned various elements and aspects, that are required, in terms of WS2, INDCs, etc. I would just like to know a little more about your strategy of engagement in the next couple of years to achieve what you have kind of outlined very comprehensively.
Okay, Vanita?
So my question is in terms of the prioritization of the various issues which are there. For example, the whole pre-2020 ambition and action, which is still not there. The second is the INDC, the kind of figures which will come. And the third is the global architecture, which will be there by 2050. So what do you think would be the priority for the next 2 years? Because that also becomes a priority for civil society to engage here, in terms, what one should be actually focusing on in the next 2 years.
Hi, I'm Swati from Terry. I'm new to the group. My question is in addition to what ma'am had already asked, that to Lavanya again, that in case there is non-compliance, do we under international law look at a nature of penalties that can be prescribed for the countries who actually opt out of under the multinational framework? So.
Okay. I'll start from Manish. You have a simple question to answer, and in case, just be brief, and then we can continue over lunch also.
Well, on NAMAs, India has had a very principled position rooted in the articulation in the Bali Action Plan that NAMAs are those actions which are supported with finance, technology and capacity building, and as under UNFCCC. So far there was no money coming through UNFCCC channels for implementing NAMAs. That's why India was silent on that. But parallelly, if you know, there is an agreement with the German government, and they are exploring the possibility of NAMAs in two sectors, waste and forestry.
Thanks.
Thank you for those questions on compliance. Ultimately, international law is based on sovereign autonomy of states. So if states choose to be part of an agreement, they choose to. If they don't, they don't. So the importance of designing these instruments and designing them well is to make sure there are incentives to participate. And I think as far as the non-compliance issues that we've already had, they're not strictly non-compliance issues. Canada and others have chosen to leave the agreement in the second commitment period. And that's perfectly within their rights to do, because they've chosen not to participate or continue in an agreement, and that every state has a sovereign right to do that. Within the agreement itself, to the extent that they didn't comply with their first commitment period targets, by 2015 we'll have an assessment of that, and there are consequences to that, and they might buy themselves back into compliance. So as long as they have followed the rules within the agreement for withdrawal from the agreement, it's perfectly legitimate for countries to withdraw. So India could decide to be part of the WTO or not tomorrow, and that's, you know, in that sense, that's why the first sort of question that international lawyers and international law courses, they ask you is international law law? You know, in a sense that it's not uniformly applicable, you can't enforce it. So we can't look for that kind of parity in international law as we have in domestic law. But having said that, I think the compliance system, the Kyoto Protocol, is the most advanced system that we had under multilateral environmental agreements. It actually did have penalties for those who continue to stay. If they did not comply in the first commitment period, there was some sort of consequences in terms of the next commitment period. But of course, that whole regime sort of, you know, caving into itself. As far as penalties in general international law is concerned, again, I mean, there is a general international law obligation to not take actions that would have transboundary impact. So even if it's not a legal obligation within the UNFCCC, and as I said, you know, content and language and all of that might make those obligations fairly ambiguous, there is a customary international law obligation to protect areas beyond your national jurisdiction from harm emanating from your jurisdiction. And so if you can establish that clearly, and if you can show causation that, you know, emissions from a country has caused sort of, you know, Tuvalu or other countries to actually drown, then it's possible to take a claim before the International Court of Justice and hold them accountable under state responsibility. But there are lots of, you know, slips between the cup and the lip on this. Causation is going to be very hard to prove. You can't show direct damage that, you know, this particular island sank because of the US emissions. So I mean, there are lots of problems in showing that and demonstrating it, but there are avenues available in international law, and some of those have been, you know, raised primarily to create that narrative of responsibility. Even if there's no chance of success in an international fora, even to just create that narrative of, you know, some countries have to be held to account, and creating that narrative and sort of, you know, the sort of narrative building and sort of significance of those cases are also important.
Thank you. Sudha.
Okay, so just to start off on the budget question, I think that there are, like, excuses can be made across the board. Like, I don't think that they, like, in real terms, obviously there is going to be some impact of putting very big amount of money outside of the ODA for a lot of developed countries, specifically the GCF. I assume you meant developed country budgets, right? So in that sense, obviously there is sort of a stress on their budgets if there is no, if there is a demand on finance. But that does not mean that they can't give us certainty. Two, that does not mean that there can't be a demand which can be couched in a language which is comfortable to their national budgetary processes. There are good countries, there are bad countries. If there is a certainty that, look, this is the sort of international finance that needs to be mobilized for this purpose. Unfortunately, the purpose itself is not very clear, because a lot of developed countries take a lot of time to develop proposals, whether it's on adaptation or mitigation. Like, it took so much time. Like, India still hasn't, is still developing a NAMA. And if India is like a, you know, relatively capacity, sort of, it has relatively good capacity, then it's a real problem. Think about other, like, really smaller countries. So there's a question of where the money should be going in, and maybe with that sort of a certainty, there might be a better way to package the demand in itself. Because just calling for 1,000 billion, 300 trillion, whatever amount won't make a difference, because that, I don't think that solves the problem. What could possibly solve the problem is how we actually present the demands in the format of, like I said, the adaptation fund has projects which are in the pipeline. It needs money. That's a very strong demand, and these projects are already ready to go, just need finance. Same goes for the debate on Namas now, where a lot of things are in the pipeline. There's just money to get going. So the more certainty there is on where the finance needs, what the financial need is for, the more I think that there can be greater clarity for the developed countries to improve their budgetary sort of allocations towards climate finance. I hope. That's the principle that at least I'm operating. The other thing, I think in terms of prioritization itself, safeguards. I think that there are so many moving pieces right now in the climate debate. Forget the UNFCCC, but it's basically going to lock us for 10 years in a regime where a lot of our work, whether we like it or not, the UNFCCC and the international process has an impact on the sort of work that we are doing domestically. And I think that this regime is going to lock us for 10 years. We need to ensure that this regime has enough safeguards so that it does not have an impact or a really negative feedback to our work. Like, I can easily see that if there's something like a carbon neutrality target, India's nuclear sort of dreams and India's CCS dreams or whatever random technology dreams we have are going to be justified at an international level. So there are like these sort of things, and we as civil society really need to sort of coalesce around working together, because I feel that because there are so many pieces, you might have a certain expertise in a particular area, but like the other area has an impact. Like agriculture is something that very few of us are actually looking at, or loss and damage. So there are like, it's a really important time for us to start influencing rather than just commenting on how bad things are, but actually putting forward a lot of ideas on the table. On the broader strategy itself, I think that what we're trying to do is focus a lot more on safeguards itself. So if you look at, we're not so much focused on the number that comes out, we're more focused on how that number gets assessed. Or for finance, we're not so much focused on how big the financial number is, but actually what's the sort of MRV. Basically focus on quality of the commitments that come forward, as well as try to get as much foothold in this agreement for future regimes to actually improve it. So we look at it as an evolving agreement. In all likelihood, it is going to be some sort of an evolving agreement. And if that happens, we need to have placeholders which safeguard our interests. And like, if you read through the document, you'll realize that a lot of it has to do with this sort of footholds that we're trying to create. And obviously, we're trying to work across the board, whether it's like within countries, specific countries. Like I can talk about like the broader strategy for different pillars itself. But that's what the goal is, to actually not work like Copenhagen, where you put up very unrealistic demands, which after not being met, we feel very disoriented about, but actually work backwards and see what will make those demands actually realized in the next 2-3 years or so, hopefully. So that's the broader idea behind the strategy and the problems itself.
Thank you. So, no summary for this session. I think let's go and have lunch. We can continue talking about it. And we come back at 3. Yeah, thank you. Manage it. भाई ऐसे क्यों कहते हो जर्नलिस्ट से